right, everybody, so thank you so much for showing up and welcome. My name is Tonia Andreina and I'm very excited to host you today. So kind of entering in on this conversation, right, the title of this is Stewarding Our Environmental Legacy in Kankakee County. And by the end of today's presentation and field day portion, you're going to understand why it is just that, a legacy. And I'm hopeful that by participating in today, you'll be able to have more capacity and insight as to how you can tangibly, effectively have a positive impact both on wildlife and your belly, that is if you like to eat, because one of the focuses of today's presentation is food forests. So another question that comes up with this is, what are we growing in the world's best soil? Because many people have called Kankakee County soil the best soil in the world, and we're going to dive into all that as well. Very briefly, a bit about myself and my background. I spent about 10 years doing environmental education in the city with kids, grades pre-K through 12, and community development work around urban agriculture and food access. So a lot of skill transfer training in terms of how do we grow our own food from seed to fruit, and even then with some of those kids take it into the market and learn how to sell that back for an economic kind of full circle loop. My formal education is as a geographer through the DePaul University department. Really love geography, and that's something that sparked my interest in all of this stuff, food access and more. I'm currently finishing a master's degree in landscape architecture from University of Illinois, and shout out to all of my UI people in the room. But without further ado, let's jump on into some of this. So this is the crux, and I know I'm just throwing a lot of questions at you at the beginning of this as we launch off, but this is really the crux of my research for the last year. How do we feed ourselves while simultaneously increasing habitat for endangered species? And this is a critical intersection, right? Because everybody needs to eat, right, to live. But also, we're in this sixth mass extinction, which is incredibly dismal if you know about it, right? Which you all do. And we need to figure out how to respond to that in a way that feels healthy and constructive for ourselves and our well-being as individuals and community members. And before I do jump into the full breadth of this, I just want to acknowledge some people, especially the Native American people and African American people who were brought over here and once and still do steward this land in our county. We're going to get into a whole chapter of this presentation on this very topic, but we need to acknowledge what land we're on and the fact that this used to be an absolutely thriving Native American community. Also want to thank Sam Stickley, who's here with his wife. So awesome, thank you so much for making the trip. This human is a GIS wizard, everybody. He has helped me through so many issues over all these projects. He's absolutely incredible. His dedication is unparalleled and a fantastic human being in the U of I world. So thank you so much, Sam, for being here and all your help. Also to my supervising professors throughout this process, Connor O'Shea, Kelly Lemon, Mary Pat McGuire, and Joseph Alsuler. Obviously the Kankakee Public Library for holding the space here, and Anna Swell in the back. Thank you so much for managing all that. And the audience, every single person who showed up today and is listening to this in the recorded version, thanks for caring about nature and wanting to do something about it. So this is part of this passion of mine for practicality. All of the plants you're gonna find in here today are available right now through Possibility Place Nursery in Moni. Has anybody been there, know about it? It's a fantastic spot. They have an incredible selection. There's something like 380 plants that are all native to our region, which really says a lot. And I'll get to this Excel stuff later as to what's pictured here, but the point is they have a lot of awesome native plants that are very good for wildlife. A little bit about the academic or philosophical contextualization of today's content. This is kind of a spill sheet of some of my most prominent influences and people whose work has inspired me or I've built on or somehow incorporated in this process. So just a shout out, pictured there is Lila June in the TED Talk. If anybody wants a really riveting TED Talk experience on a rainy day, please do check out Lila June. She's a very engaging, beautiful, knowledgeable speaker and has a lot to share around Native American culture. Also, we have, the Lorax, because who didn't grow up with that? There permaculture people too, who have some really fantastic YouTube channels, Edible Acres and Canadian Permaculture Legacy, if you're really wanting to nerd out about that stuff. And of course, in the context of landscape architecture, we have people, you know, like Roy Diblig and Thomas Rayner and his partner, Ms. West, Claudia West, in the Planting in a Post-Wild World. And, you know, there's Douglas Tallamy. If you haven't heard of Doug Tallamy yet, in The Nature of Oaks, fantastic book. It's all about the ecological benefits and just a vast number of things that oaks do for our local habitats. So yeah, there's also this amazing podcast on the lower left, in Defensive Plants, if you ever want to nerd out about black walnut allelopathy, as you'll see later, it's there. And last but not least, my grandparents, because they're awesome. My grandpa on the left, he taught me, they're in heaven now, you know, but my grandpa taught me how to grow food as a kid, and that really was what started everything for me. He was this awesome Italian guy, first generation, stone cutter, stone craftsman, grew everything from scratch, built everything from scratch. He turned, you know, limestone into beautiful sculptures, and he was just a real craftsperson who threw his full dedication to anything he chose to tackle, and just a very good human being. My grandmother was the one who taught me how to readily apply all of that produce in the kitchen, because again, I like to eat. So that's relevant. And you know, in the spirit of my grandmother, there's a pop quiz, and the pop quiz is why are, you know, fresh foods and vegetables relevant. And in this just funny, cheeky example, it's because you can turn them into cake, you can turn them into things that you enjoy eating, right? But I put this here to remind us that my grandma always said, remember that, there'll be a quiz later. And I'm gonna do the same thing to you today. So I'm gonna be asking you about 20 times. Now, what do you think about this? And I'm hopeful that we can make this an interactive experience so that we can all have, you know, a good time and hopefully learn a thing or two in the process. And it's relevant that I bring up my grandma, because 5 generations ago, they came from Canada and we settled here. And if anybody knows where Turnberry is, that subdivision in town, that was my great-great-grandma's land and grandpa's land, Mimir and Pimir. And now it is not a pig farm anymore, it's Turnberry, a nice little subdivision, but they came here for this incredible ecology that our region is known for, and that is the Grand Kankakee Marsh. As you can see, most of it is formed in Indiana's side, but our portion is on the east side of the county, which is our first field site today. And I'm so excited to talk about the ecology once we get there and to just witness the different nuances that are totally unique compared to other parts of our county. Throughout the day, the 4 sites we'll visit, each one is extremely different from the last. So you're gonna see just so much diversity in such a short, you know, amount of time, or mileage as it may be. But this is to show us where 1/5 of all migratory birds to continental North America once migrated every single year. Hence the film that was on the beginning, Everglades of the North. It's a Lakeshore Media thing. It's a documentary on this very thing, this very point in history. And you know, with 1/5 of all migratory birds to continental North America, you have an incredible amount of biodiversity. Can somebody just give us one maybe implication for soil health based on birds, like fill in the blanks for us there? Bird poop? Yeah, bird poop, there you go, 2 words, done, that's it, bird poop. Because those are ecological nutrient cyclers, right? The birds are eating an incredible amount of biomass and insects and things like that, and then recycling throughout the landscape in a bioavailable form. So that's kind of the context. And as you can see, the rest of our county is not far away from that edge territory. And speaking of the rest of our county, this is just showing the drainage boundary for our river. And you can really see in this image how the Kankakee River leading into the Iroquois is so central and integral to our county and our whole framework, our whole structuring, right? The river is literally, when they drew the county boundaries, these arbitrary, you know, borders, they were really thinking about the river, right? It's centered. It shows you that it's important. And why is that? If we could just put our like old timer hat on from way back in the day, why would a river be so important for a town? Yeah. Movement, right? What else? is an important point. And at one point in time, this was considered the food pantry of Chicago because we were so fertile, we were so productive, and we grew so much. So spending a little time in the past, this is our legacy of kind of where we came from. These are some of our different ecotypes across the county. In pink, and I've summarized these greatly, there's about 1 million different types of prairies and sedge meadows and all these things, but I've super simplified this key, so everything in pink is a prairie of some sort. Everything in this kind of greenish color is a sedge meadow of sorts. So you can see throughout our area where we have a concentration in prairies and where we have a concentration in sedge meadows. A lot of people might oversimplify those two biomes as grasslands, but there's a lot going on here. Any brief, kind of observations in relationship to the river? What ecosystem type tends to be closer to the river?
Marshes?
Yeah, there's totally marshes in there, but if it's like a pink thing or a green thing, which is it closer to the river?
Woodlands?
Yeah, there's woodlands, but would you say it's a lot of pink or green outside of those woodlands? Prairie, right? Pink. So it's just, you both are totally right. There's marshes and there's woodlands right around the river. And woodlands around water sources is gonna come up later. But the point is, prairies tended to congregate more centrally along those river streams, so there's river beds. And then outside of that, we have the sedge meadow. So again, just as good land management technique, right? And that's what I want to focus on today, is not the jargon, because we can get lost in a million titles and terms for things. I want to get across the really functional, practical things that we can do, and use terms accordingly as they're useful, right? So just an observation we're making. Now that was the past, this is now. And this is LiDAR data, so satellite imagery of our current land cover in this county. All of the beige in this, I hope you can read it. Can you see on the key what all this kind of light beige color is? What is it? Yeah, it's development in the terms of crops. It's crop development. So all that is corn and soy, most of which is GMO, and that's what we've turned our land into. Pretty stark difference. Like, wow, that's where we came from. All the pink pretty prairie and the sedge meadow, and boom, that's where we're at now. So you can see our urban center in that kind of fire color regime there. And then outside of that, we got a lot of agriculture. And that's, again, the crux of this whole presentation is how do we feed ourselves while simultaneously building habitat. And then just to simplify it out, because there's a lot going on there, this image is all of our remaining habitat. So ain't that, yeah, right? Ain't that some stuff? Look at that, like, oh wow. But don't worry, we're gonna put you down and bring it up today, so just hold in there, okay? But for real though, this is all we got left. So just to make that easier to read for y'all, that's how it breaks up numerically or percentage-wise. So our biggest remaining habitat type is what? Yeah, deciduous forests, okay? And then after that, you can see we have a strong wetland palette, right? And these LiDAR terms are like determined by, I don't know, Sam, you'd know where they're determined by, but I'm always saying some legislative body or some organization that's the state, right? Who's doing that. But they're terms that kind of oversimplify what's going on in order to make it talkable. If we don't say, yeah, deciduous forest, then we might get lost in, well, is it an oak savanna? Is it a oak hickory blend? All these different nuances. So these are just like functional categories that we can work with. So then that brings up this obvious question, right? Like, what happened between this on the lower left and this in the upper right? What happened here? What happened?
Population growth and sustainable farming and all that.
Yeah, population growth and unsustainable farming and all that. That's basically what happened here. So there's a lot of development, but in the process of development, what have we really done? We've destroyed, okay? And yeah, it's not all that. We can't throw out the baby with the bathwater, but the point remains. And this is a little graphic representation to just kind of really ground these concepts. In the upper left, you'll see habitat loss. The nice green habitat, island, whatever, it gets shorter, it gets smaller, it shrinks, okay? In the upper right, habitat fragmentation, what's that going through the habitat? A road, right? So if you put a road through a nice habitat, that causes, you know, how did the chicken cross the road scenarios. It's literally a fragmented environment. It's not any more cohesive. And it can be really precarious and damaging for wildlife, more than we would think, because we're humans and we have these huge bodies and these huge legs, and we can just walk and traipse about however we want. But some animals, insects, bacteria, they don't move that way, right? And then the bottom here is kind of like the solution or the intervention that we might bring in our modern context. In lime green, we can create more islands or more spots that connect larger spots, and that's a form of connectivity. And we can also create these little groovy greenway things that kind of are like little bridges for wildlife, right? That go over the road. So this is using those LiDAR determined labels, and I just made a graphic representation of what each of these might look like in case we're like, what does that mean? So if you see like the scrub, that's all the lower growing ones in the middle, and you know, on the left there's an evergreen forest. It's pretty straightforward, maybe everybody here already knows that, gets that, no big deal. But just in case this is useful, I wanted to show it to you, and also I matched all the IUCN Red List data from this large group, IUCN, that looks at global patterns for populations of endangered and threatened species across large swaths of land. And I matched them with our local habitat types that they correspond with. So you can see with some of the dots in the line where a ruler might help you read it easier, but you know, all these different types of species that are listed as endangered for our county correspond with a habitat type. And so that's all like scientifically grounded association there based on their website. So, you know, how do we implement this connectivity locally? There's 3 steps we can go about it. We can obviously identify the native habitat types and which still remain, which we've already done here. And then we can mimic whichever habitat type our given landscape seems to more or less flow with, associate with, be. So if you have a landscape and it's like a grassland, you could just say, well, I'm gonna make this an herbaceous oasis. It'll be like a prairie or whatever. If you have a scrub type territory, you could really lean into your shrub selection and say, well, hey, it seems like, you know, somebody cut out the overstory here a long time ago, shrubs are growing really well, let's just go with that, you know? You get the gist. It's kind of, where am I at in this ballpark of ecosystems, and how can I lean more into whatever the land is showing me? And once you do lean in, you should definitely consider planting diversely and densely and seeing what thrives best. You might have some failures along the way, but that's part of the learning process, and you can adapt accordingly. I say densely. Why do you think I'm saying we should plant densely?
Because not everything survives. It's best to have backup.
Yeah, not everything survives. It's best to have backup. That's definitely like top of the list. And also like nature, when left alone or when stewarded really well, is very dense in its vegetative coverage and its diversity, right? That's something we should take away from those first maps about what used to be here versus what is, you know. Moving on, I'm just matching some of the jargon here to, again, try to make it manageable. So the LiDAR things you just saw in that elongated habitat graphic, those are all in black background, and then the NRCS soil data, which was that pretty pink and green thing with all the different where we came from, that's in black text, white background. So I just kind of matched some of the labels to where we can make sure we get these are all connected. And again, this is showing how LiDAR data can oversimplify, or vice versa. NRCS data could also, well, that's not oversimplifying, but I'm oversimplifying their key, because again, about 20 types of prairies are on this prairie word, right? There's a lot of diversity there. But moving on. This is a brief coverage of our 2 soil types, again, with the simplification theme. I oversimplified all the clay heavy loams as this nice darker brownish tan, and then in the light, the screen's kind of changing the color on the screen, but this lighter color in the middle, that's all sandy loams or sand-dominated soils. So again, what do you see with the river? In relationship to the river, which type of soils tend to be closer to the river? The sand ones, right? Totally. So the sand ones tend to be closer to the river. The clay ones tend to be more outside of it. And this lines up pretty directly with those ecosystems. So if the sandy is around the river, what type of ecosystem did this used to be around the river generally? Prairie. So we have a lot of sand prairie themes here. And outside of that, the sedge meadows tend to correspond with more clay-heavy soils. So even from these maps, aside from reading through countless hundreds of plant descriptions about how they survive best in which environments, we can begin to infer, oh, so clay-heavy soils, sedges probably really prefer generally, and oh, sand-heavy soils, that's kind of what our region's prairie profile was really resonant with. So this whole habitat thing about what's currently left, it's really important for those endangered species that we have in the county. And the state list we're about to see, we have 61 species currently listed as endangered or threatened in our county. There's the state list, some of those beings. And if you're able to see the text on the screen on the far right where it says last observed, some of these species haven't even been observed in our county since the 1940s. Like, that's absurd. Okay, there's some seriously outdated data profiles here. Like the buffalo clover, it says 1884. I don't know how they got a record from that far back, but I mean, this is intense, right? To think about the fact that there's people out there just searching and combing through our remaining little wildlife patches trying to find these species. I mean, let that soak in a minute, right? But along the vein of thinking local and acting global, I want to show you some of the habitat ranges on a more extended scale. So I'm not showing the entirety of these different species habitat ranges, but I'm showing you a larger part of North America, and that circle, as y'all know, is kind of where we're at right now, geographically. So these are all of our water-based animals that intersect in Kankakee County, and their larger range across a broader North American context. So Blanding's turtle being probably one we're more likely to have heard. All the mussels. Kankakee County is known for its river, right? It is known. We have the best quality river in the whole state, y'all, literally. And mussels are an indicator species, meaning that if the river was not healthy, they would not be there. Now, it's kind of a self-feeding system with that because mussels are also amazing water purifiers. So the mussels aren't going to exist there if it's not clean, and they ain't going to clean if it ain't clean. So it's kind of like one of those things where if you have them, it's like a double win, right? This is a lot of the flying animals. I think it's so fascinating. This, is it the grosbeak? The whooping crane. The whooping crane's territory, that kind of elongated thing, like where it splits. What are the odds that we're on that path? You know, I mean, it's one of those things where, again, looking and zooming out, thinking local and acting global, this is how you're making an impact if you plant habitat for these beings in our region, right? Of course, the rusty patch bumblebee and the regal fritillary, right? These beautiful insects that are literally falling in population for no other reason besides the fact that we humans have killed their homes. And if you like a friend and you want them to come over, it's like a good thing to, you know, have them over with a place to stay and feed them a little something, right? And that's what habitat is. You're giving them a place to stay and a little something to eat while they're there. Some of the mushrooms and the plants. Why is it that American elm is on this list, right? Why is that? You got it, the Dutch elm disease. Womp, womp, womp. There's also this thing, you know, that is like, comes along with globalization, and it's like this cross exchange of insects and bacteria and this, that, and the other. And so you have, you know, like the apple ash borer is another example. Probably the reason it's not on this list is because there's still young ash trees in succession that thrive, but once they get to a certain age, you know, the ash borer kills them and attacks them. So they're still around, they're just not in their old growth phase anymore, unfortunately, largely speaking. So where are these ecosystems in real life, right? Like, let's ground this. This is all graphic. And moreover, where are the savannas? And this is a little nugget because the savannas, that's a juicy little biscuit we're gonna get into here because savannas have a lot of cultural context and history, and just want you to think about it. So here's, speaking of savannas, let's just observe this real quick. This is a light concept that I made for another project, and it's not entirely representative of a savanna, because if you see the pawpaw grove in the lower left, that's almost like more of a woodland condition, right? So you can see how it's all in blue, it's like shaded because the trees, their spacing and their canopy coverage, it's really more or less shaded all day in that region, right? Whereas if you go to the cherry grove, you can start to see some of that yellow peeking through the horizon's shade line, right? The drip line and the shade angle. So that's more reminiscent of a savanna. And in a true savanna, you have also these larger swaths in the top, like in the yellow where you see the native prairie, the watermelon patch, Three Sisters, etc. That's more open sunlight condition. So a savanna, we'll see more images later, but it's a gradient. It allows sunshine to hit the forest floor, in other words, is one other way of thinking about it. So these are some of the places where we actually have these habitat types. And be thinking about that graphic in this process, like which habitat types are pictured here, right? Maybe an open water condition and a woody wetland condition are seen here. We'll see this site later today. It's the Kankakee River State Park, by the way. And we'll see this later today at about the same time before this sunset moment. But this is, again, the Kankakee River in different angles, different places. Remember I said we're big on mussels here? The state park, Stacy, the manager out there, put the sign up this year because somebody tagged their Facebook page with 5-gallon buckets of mussels. Like, no big deal. We're just here collecting mussels off the Kankakee. And she's like, because you saw that map, right? Where we have like 8 endangered mussels in our river. So it's kind of like a big deal. But you know, on the flip side, the people still recognize that we have that asset in our river, which is in and of itself a beautiful thing. So here we go, is off the suspension bridge. This is our second to last, or no, this is our last stop today. We'll see this view right now. Very excited for that. The Kankakee River State Park is where I grew up, actually, right across the street from there in Altorf. And this is across Route 102 from there. That's actually a Native American, this whole creek, Rock Creek, was a huge Native American settlement for a specific band of the Potawatomi called the Shawanasi, and they were some of the absolute last Native Americans to be pushed west on the Trail of Tears from our county. And so this is where I grew up in their legacy and their remnants, you know, like where they call home. And it's beautiful. Y'all are gonna see it, it's beautiful. This is a prairie restoration, which we'll see today. Gonna be awesome. We'll talk about that when we're there. This is a very wild east side of town in the Pembroke community, Savannah. We'll see. Just some of the skipping ahead here, for the sake of time, just seeing some of these spaces we're about to see. Just a lot of ecological diversity here, as you can tell. Love those legume nitrogen fixers, lead plant, or ironweed, sorry, beautiful being. White-mouthed daylily, solidago, really nice stuff. And then you have this cultural layer, right? So these people, this was actually some farmers I worked with this past summer, and he was, I think both of the family members are from Mexico, but they turned the gourds into like bird homes, and it was very like direct off the land, right? It's like, hey, we're gonna just take this and make this into this beautiful thing. And we've all seen those at the farmer's market, but this was like somebody at their home, like, yeah, this is what we do. This is what we do. Sassafras, one of my new favorite plants. Has anybody ever been around a sassafras plant? Cool, yeah, obviously it's there, yeah. It's amazing, y'all, and the leaves taste so good. If you like root beer, you should really consider that. This is a prairie, again, we'll see this today at Perry Farm, but I just wanted to show you the prescribed burn that just happened. I took this image less than 3 weeks ago. This was like 2 weeks ago. And when we get out there today, you're gonna be like, what? That was less than 2 weeks ago? Because, you know, you'll see what happens since. Just some of the different. Bloodwort, we have so many high quality spring ephemerals we're gonna be seeing today. There's bloodwort pictured there. Or bloodroot, sorry, bloodroot. all the warts and the roots and the teeth, I just don't know what's what anymore. But anyway, rare, interesting, high quality plants. So let's just zoom in a little. There's Township area. And this area is where at the very beginning, you'll remember I showed you the Grand Kankakee Marsh and its extent and how it briefly overlapped with our county. This is the overlap in our county. So this is the remnant of where 1/5 of all migratory birds used to go, okay? And this is the cultural legacy there, which is enormous. So back in the day, remember I mentioned the Potawatomi natives especially were some of the most recent people to call that area home and to cultivate that land and to actually maintain the savanna ecotype. Well, there's also this rich history of enslaved people who had since either run away or become free, cultivating that land and stewarding it. And there was a large period of time that not many people talk about in our county and in our modern day, where those two groups of people overlapped and worked together. So there was like almost like a camp in the Pembroke Township area between people who are native and people who are black, and forming these amazing friendships, allyships, just working relationships to, keep away the invading white man at the time. Like there was a lot of violence going on back in the day, and still obviously, but there was literally people were being pushed on the Trail of Tears, people were being killed, people were, we don't need to go into all that, but like you get the point, you know the point. And the point is this area, not only has it been an ecological remnant, but there's still a lot of people there today who are descended of these people who once stewarded this land, who we attribute or need to attribute, because functionally it's absolutely true, this remaining ecology to. If they weren't there, this ecosystem would not exist, and that's not an overstatement, it's not an exaggeration. We're gonna get into the details of that in this presentation and in the field day as to why that is or how that is, but this is the legacy of this area. So a soils map of this area. You'll see there's a lot of sand in this area. It's a lot of sandy soils. The drainage classes, this is cool because at our first sight it's gonna become really apparent as to why this is. Everybody's just gonna click as to why this is happening here. But there's two very different drainage classes right up against each other in this area. So in the yellow, it's very dry. And in the blue, it's very wet. Now right off the bat, why would that be? Can somebody explain that to me? Because usually that's not how water flows, right? If you're thinking of it down a slope, like an even slope, it's maybe drier at the top and then it's wetter at the bottom. Yeah, Tara?
Maybe it takes longer to drain off.
Mm-hmm. It could totally take longer to drain, sure. Any other ideas?
Tidal drainage for farming.
Also a valid point, Katrina. We've definitely been talking a lot about that in that NRES class. There is a tidal drainage system out there, but the wetlands definitely persist through it, which is, to me, pretty cool, because it's kind of like tiles, schmiles, it's still going to be a wetland at the end of the day. But the reason is topography largely, because these yellow points are high points, and the glaciers back in the day really changed what's going on out there. It looks more reminiscent of the Indiana Dunes than it does not. So when you get out there, these are usually really high points in the landscape compared to really low points in the landscape, which is also why there's so much ecological and biological diversity out there. And turning this into ecosystem types again, the black oak savanna is there, which is our first site we're going to see. And this is some of the rarest ecosystems in the entire world, okay, black oak savanna. And this is the best black oak savanna in the world, according to ecologists who are actual authorities on this topic. So really, what a gem do we have here? Quercus valentina, black oak savanna. And there are still some prairie remnants out there along with the Kankakee wet drift flats. But that's, again, historical imagery. So let's talk about this gradient ecosystem thing, and eventually this is going to really dovetail quite nicely and explicitly into food forest, because right now you're going to be like, what is this connection? And that's a good place to be. But basically the savanna is kind of this overlap of this middle phase between a prairie and a woodland. There's some trees, not a lot of trees. There's a lot of herbaceous stuff that can still survive because, again, sun can hit the floor of the environment. On the left is more of a savanna, on the right is more of a prairie with a backdrop of a windbreak, the wooded windbreak. That's where I'm supposed to be like, now which is which, but I think y'all get it. So where are the savannas in this LiDAR data? Dun, dun, dun. though, really, in this LiDAR data? Well, it probably hasn't picked it up because there's such a small ecosystem, such a minuscule remnant in our larger palette, right? And they've actually associated it, I'm sure, with more of a mixed forest or deciduous forest. Because savannas, again, it's on a gradient. It's kind of like a more spaced out woodland in a sort. And why do the savannas exist here? I've gotten a lot of feedback on this graphic. I know there's a lot going on, but I hope it can serve some function for us today. And the reason, the savannas existed is because the natives, you can see in number 2 there, this is a prescribed fire, just like an artistic rendition of that. I'm sure that's not how they were out there in full gear, like doing the dance at the fire. Maybe they were, but this is more of a surface fire that people bring in, like you saw the prairie remnant that had been prescribed burn. That's what we're talking about. And the natives did that. They cultivated it periodically because it removed the thick brush and it revitalized the soil through killing all the dead. Well, the dead material was actually brought into its most rudimentary form through the burning, so it became much more bioavailable, right? And really just like making this thing a reality, because without thinning of the woods, the savanna is just going to turn into woodlands. And that's a key point here, is that without some form of human anthropogenic influence, we're not having a savanna. Savannas are human contingent in many ways, which is really like mind-blowing, because modern ecologists are kind of facing that now, having to realize like the reason the savanna exists is because of humans before us, and it's up to us to keep stewarding it. And that's why you have so many people out there doing prescribed burns anymore, right? Because we are starting to really understand. I say starting like it's brand new, but as a whole, in our larger human history, we're really starting to understand the importance of a human management factor. And another way that we might go about it that I was proposing, managing the savannas, is for sustainable timber production, because we do have lots of thickets of woods out there in that biome that I think would, as our elders or ancestors have done, we need to thin the wood. So if we thin the wood from those environments and turn it into building material that's local and sourced locally, we're not going to be waiting on a shipment for 5 months or whatever from wherever overseas for our timber, or the Pacific Northwest, right? Granted, it'll take you, 5 years to dry out a big log, but if you're going to be, doing this as a larger production thing over a long period of time, why do we in Kankakee County not have building companies that are pairing with ecological restoration people? I mean, maybe that's a little neoliberal of me, but that's the area that we're in. This is our era that we're in, right? So we have to think about how can market solutions meet ecological solutions. But in any event, they currently are doing prescribed burns on public-owned lands out there, and different groups like the Nature Conservancy, they're doing stuff like that, and there's a lot of wildfires that actually start wildfires, a lot of loose fires that start out there for people burning trash, which is part of the history as to why the savanna still remains in a more modern context, ironically. So here you see the typical black oak savanna plant community, which is just an assemblage of plants that tend to exist in that place. And in this area, it's like the layers of the forest. You have to think about it like that, right? So at the top, there's the black oak, kind of the keystone species that everything else is really relying on and centering around. And then you have a lot of catalpas out there. I love catalpas. Do y'all love catalpas? They're like a tropical Midwest native, It's like, aloha! You're from here though, but you look like you're from Hawaii. They're beautiful. All the way down, we have the sassafras, which again is how we got what beverage? Yeah, from the natives, right? They're the ones that figured that out first. And then we have the sumac, which makes an incredible sumac aid, much like a lemonade. Again, native and totally awesome. Black raspberries, wood asters, and butterfly weeds. And this is their layer association in the woodlands. So you can see how the natives were cultivating these plants, and they cultivated them in such a way where the layers of the forest were taken into account, and they were placed in their ideal locations. And since I say this is our legacy and that it's a remnant, because it is, it's a remnant. And not many people, I've never heard anybody say this is a remnant of a Native American food forest. But I was in it the other day and I was like, dude, this is a food forest. And I called my friend who works for the Savannah Institute. I was like, Omar, this is a food forest remnant. He's like, yeah, it is. And I'm like, wow, it's just this profound realization, because these are the plants that these communities cultivated over, generations, and the fact that those people are since removed, the natives, doesn't mean that their plants, the planting footprint is, not anymore there. It's gone on through succession, and because we plant in a savanna ecosystem or a food forest ecosystem, at that, in the layers of a forest, and with the notion of succession in mind, it only makes sense that the natives understood this technology. And again, Lila June is a great person to talk to, or listen to, regarding this topic. These are some of the functions of these plants, by the way, each and every one of them, that are very, very common and grow prolifically out there. So permaculture is largely co-opting and translating native knowledge, and that's something else I want to really make clear throughout today, that when we talk about permaculture and food forests, that's really all from Native American stewardship practices, because when our European friends came over and did not groovy things, there was a lot of other land management techniques that were also cool and very productive and functional, but a lot of times they were very ecologically damaging, so they weren't so cool, right? And again, like I already told you my legacy, I come from some French Canadian people, and I don't know what the pig farm looked like. I wasn't alive at the time. My grandma said it was a cool place, but I don't think it was as ecologically damaging as what we're doing today to our soils. But the natives grew in forests, and we'll talk more about how they use prescribed burns for hunting as well. So again, very different forms of agriculture, right? They really understood that if we hurt the land or harm the land, we're not helping ourselves. So I bring it back to this, again, the crux, the point of this whole presentation, at this point in the presentation. How can we feed ourselves while simultaneously building or growing habitat for endangered species? And that's where I'm proposing we take our own home plots of land, our own, public lands that we can start transforming, and turn those into food forests, these connective pieces of land between larger ecosystem types that still exist, whatever label it is. Is it a forest? Is it a prairie in our county? Whatever it is. How do we connect it with something highly productive that is not only helping the environment, helping nature, helping pollinators, yada yada, but helping feed us? And that's this awesome multifunctionality thing, right? And in the process, you can, move along a cultural legacy and create demonstration sites for skill transfer. And these are some of the benefits of food forests in these sort of spheres of environmental sustainability that you might be familiar with, the environmental, social, economic, and also this larger sense of ideals, because in our current culture, I think in our era today, it's never been more apparent that we need to grow ideals as long as we grow our other resources alongside those. We need to be growing our ideals, such as regenerative agriculture, more passive cultivation that requires less intense labor, because if anybody's ever even grown a home garden, you know that it's backbreaking labor to be out there cultivating, right? So if we can set up perennial systems in contrast or in complement to annual systems, why wouldn't we? Because the workload is more on the front end of that, and then it's literally all reward downhill from there, which is my favorite type of stuff, where you can just work really hard, and then you can just benefit. I love that. So why don't we do that with our landscape, right? So here's where we're getting into how do we apply this stuff? And you want to see that the 7 layers of the story of the forest, exists, right? And these are just some plants that I've again taken from the possibility place selection of what's currently available and associated with their layers. And you can just see how you can literally go there today and be like, I'm going to choose any of these from any of these levels and layers. And if I, choose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 plants, I can have all layers of the forest in my own yard. Done. So the reason we think about that, the layers of the forest, is solar capture. That's one of the primary reasons. And thinking about this, again, very practically, what ordinal direction do we want to face our, lowest growing plants? In other words, what side should we be opening up to the most for light, for solar capture? The south, right? Yeah, because most of the light comes in from the south for us. So when you're planting, your taller plants or your taller edge should be to the north, and there's multi-functions even within that. Not only is that helping increase your solar capture, but that's a windbreak, because where do our leading winds tend to come from in this region? The north, right, or the northwest. So again, multifunctionality everywhere, just sprinkle it in, love it. And this is where you can see, speaking of function, some of the functions of each of these plants. I just kind of randomly chose them for diversity to show you which, how each layer can correspond with its own function. So from top down, you could have that windbreak we just talked about, you could have food production, obviously. You could have the screening function, say you have some neighbors or a public road you're not trying to have a billboard up to, you can screen with that. Water purification, if you're just trying to be a good neighbor to the aquifer or your own lands, your own water source, so you have a well. Slope retention, pollinator, host plant species, and medicine for yourself and others. What more do you want? Forest. This is like another really scary kind of whatever graphic, but it's just to show any like really big idea people how it all connects. So, you take the forest layers and you can really just mesh that in and understand how it all situates. So, how do we do this? How do we build it out? This is just saying like observe which type your land looks like and kind of match the land to the dot on the screen, right? And then you go and you maybe ask them these questions. By the way, this presentation will eventually incarnate as a user manual so that you can, take this up in a PDF and print it, or maybe I'll sell a little like bounded versions if people want to like whatever, but I'm making a user manual here for people in the hopes that it'll be useful for practically, responding to this stuff. And you can ask yourself some of these questions. It's really text heavy, I know. But, the idea is, like looking at number 3, how will plants you choose express themselves through the seasons? That's something you're more familiar with. Everybody's out there choosing plants for their seasonal interest. Like, what's it gonna do in spring? What's gonna happen in the autumn? Like, we all like that, right? It's just, plants are cool, they're pretty, they do things in the landscape. But you can go deeper with it and be like, number 1, where if anywhere might it be okay to have a forest transition to exclusively evergreens? And keeping in mind that evergreens drop their needles and form over time a very acidic soil. So you have to think as an ecologist too, not just as a designer or a landscaper or somebody who likes to look at pretty things. You have to think about it like, hey, I'm not trying to make my soil so acidic that it's going to kill everything else around it, or am I? Because if you are, that's fine. Go ahead and plant your evergreen woodland in that corner, and you'll know that that'll just be what it is in the fullness of time, right? I just put on each of these at the bottom a few species from this larger database. In the user manual, there's 380 something native plants that I've corresponded with habitat types, as you see here. So there'll be like a database basically in this thing where you can just flip to the food forest tab or the evergreen forest tab, and you can find all the plants that are in that database that correspond with each of those labels or each of those ecosystem types. So it's really user friendly, and yes, it did take as long as you think it did to do that. So they're cross-listed, right? Because you can find the same plant in different ecosystems sometimes. So moving on, just a shrub thing. A favorite shrub of mine is also Juneberry. Has anybody had Juneberry? Oh, y'all are missing out. Oh my gosh, this June, as the name implies, please go find you a Juneberry. They are so delicious. I think they might be better than blueberries in my opinion. I've turned them into cake before, like muffins, as if they were a blueberry. Fantastic choice. You should definitely consider eating some plain or putting them in a baked good. They freeze really well. They're a pretty color. And in the autumn, that shrub is like the fire engine, orange and red, and just, it does all the things you want in an autumn shrub. It makes you food in the summer, and in the spring, all fruit comes from what? Flowers. All fruit comes from flowers. So in the spring, it has your flower set. So what more do you want? There's a spring flower, a summer food, and an autumn color. Fantastic shrub. Shrubs are like the rock stars of the landscape world. because they have so many functions and they can just look really cool and unique from each other in the process. And they're reachable, right, as humans. Like, we can reach a shrub, but you might need a ladder for a pawpaw, you know? Yeah, just a wetland thing. I'll just shout out the black willow down there. Fantastic habitat builder, multifunctional pollinator habitat, water purifier. I mean, there's so many things you can do with your landscape, even with one plant. And that's what's so exciting about the plant world, is once you begin to understand these functions, as my user guide is trying to bring forward, you can really do awesome things with land. So here's a bit of a palimpsest between what currently is and what could be using our existing landscapes. So it's a little easier to kind of conceptualize. You might recognize the picture in the backdrop from earlier. This is Rock Creek. We'll be seeing it later today. But theoretically, we could take that area where all the slopes are currently eroding into the creek's edge, and we could plant rhizome type plants that keep it in line, you know, keep the river intact, the bed intact, I should say. And we can also plant food there in that floodplain where all the sycamores currently are, a water-loving plant. We could be planting pawpaws, another bottomland species that produce the largest fruit native to this part of the world. Why are we not planting the tree that produces the largest fruit native to this part of the world in mass? I don't know the answer to that, and that's why this graphic exists. I'm really hoping that we can keep growing the pawpaws among many others, right? Again, dogwood, really good slope stabilizer, comes in about 1 million cultivar colors today. If you're not trying to be too strict with your native only, you can find a native that is a cultivar selection too. And you know, that makes a lot of flowers and pretty stuff in the process. And again, these are like the functions of those things. You have the pollinator habitat, many different niches of habitat and food production in there. In this one, it's an herbaceous system. One I'll call out is the Kankakee mallow. Anybody familiar with that already? Yeah, a little bit. Okay, so it's endemic to this island in the middle of the Kankakee River, which is again where we're going to see today, again where I grew up, and it's literally, that's the only place in the whole world that people think it grows in the wild and wildly, which is kind of mind-boggling, and it makes you wonder if that's really true, because how practical could that be? But it's this beautiful fluttering pink hollyhock, actually pictured in the herbaceous center there, and it has all these amazing white pink flowers that just kind of fill these stems. And it's, you know, on the endangered species list with the state, so why aren't we planting more of it elsewhere in our counties so that we can keep our populations of it strong? Here's a current prairie we'll visit today, but I'm conflating all the seasons at once, and like confetti on the screen to show you how different plants could have different seasonal interests, and bring in even more beauty and diversity there. That prairie's been looking a little tired to me in the last couple of years. I'm glad they burned it this year. I'm hopeful that more of the flowering plants will come in. This graphic was my kind of like critique of that, like, where are the flowers? I mean, you have a lot of woodland sunflowers or maybe some compass plant in there, but you know, and lots of goldenrod, but where are the more, you know, queen of the prairies and the coneflowers and monardas and stuff like that. Here's some of the functions of those proposed things. On a little scatter plot type image, you can see how all 4 of these plants are overwintering habitat for bees, which is critical if we're talking about how do we practically support bees. Leave the landscape the heck alone in the winter and let it be bee homes. You know, like that's where the bees and the Lepidoptera, all the butterflies and whatnot, they need to, you know, stay in there. It's safety for them. So this is what you were saying earlier about how the trees, the woodlands, were what was right up against the river. And that's what's in the upper left, is just like a Google Maps, whatever image to show that that's exactly how it tends to go, is that the trees tend to congregate around water. And as that person I mentioned a couple times now, Lila June, has talked about in her TED Talk, the natives, when they were cultivating land, they planted the trees right around water edges because they understood that this is how it goes. And in today's terms, where we're acting like we're reinventing something or rediscovering something that's already been around forever, this is called biomimicry. and to the natives, it's like good practice, you know, but I don't know what they call it. But the idea is you're planting trees around the water's edge. And why might you want to do that? Why is that a good place to put the trees?
Water purification.
Yeah, water purification, sure. And why else? You got it. Yep, absolutely. Preventing erosion, stabilization of the edge. Why else would be good?
That's flooding.
Flooding purposes. Hmm? Yeah, it's pretty. Yeah. And functionally, where do all the nutrients tend to like congregate in a larger landscape? Around water, right? Because water is a big part of decomposition, not the only part, and nuances to be discussed later. I gotta be like, put it on the back burner. But for real, like, you know, water is where a lot of nutrients tend to congregate. And so if you're gonna plant a tree, especially for the purposes of food production, and you're not trying to be out there running drip tape in the 1800s or today for that matter, it's a great idea to plant it right next to a body of water, because especially a flowing body, not a lake, not a pond, but a flowing body, because of what? All the good bacteria, the aerobic bacteria, the water gets the air in a moving environment, right? And it circulates the fish contributions throughout the landscape. So this is how, again, we can begin to mimic nature for the sake of expanding our benefits. Well, I kind of started in on this stuff, but what natural processes are at play that make those nutrients in there? What might be going on?
Well, rivers are big earth movers, so
Yeah.
get a lot of silt buildup and.
Ding, 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 ding. That's totally it. Silt-heavy soils are the most nutrient-rich soils, right? They're the most available soils for plants to work with, and they're very, very good planting material to have, you know, to be working with. And so that's totally what's happening, and they're moving that earth, as he said, they're moving the nutrients in that moving body of water across the stream, so wherever you're planting, the roots are just like capturing it like little sponges or little nets for nutrients through the circulating system. It's kind of like aquaponics or hydroponics on steroids, right? It's like nature's version of that. So just thinking about that and how silt can play such a powerful role. And you know, the basics of a berm and a swale, this is something you'll hear a million times in permaculture. Put your berm here, put your swale here. And the idea is water management at the end of the day, and nutrient management, right? Because of what we just saw. And you know, you can do a lot with a berm and a swale. And if you have a big slope on your land, I know we're pretty flat out in the Midwest here where we're at, but if you do have a slope, and there's always some slope somewhere, you can plant on contour, make a little ditch basically, make a little hill. Make a little ditch and make a little hill. And when water flows down, it's gonna be like, I have to go through this mound before I get to that swale, and I have to, you know, stick in this swale if I'm moving too fast, and slow down and sink and store. And that's really what water management on your land is all about. It's about slowing, spreading, and storing the water, because you're recharging the local environment for all your planting stuff, but you're also getting it back into the aquifer, back into the water table, which I talked with our state representative, and we have some of the best water security in Kankakee County out of the whole state, because we have such shallow and prolific, also many levels in our aquifers. I'm not a specialist in this, so I'm like trying to not use the wrong words, but we do have many different levels of water storage underground is the main takeaway. And when we are out at Rock Creek, I learned from him that is actually the actual aquifer edge of our county. So we will be standing on the edge of the aquifer in our county, the most like giving one to our larger region. And it's because it's so shallow right there. That's like the headwaters of the whole thing. But pretty exciting stuff. And it gets recharged every year, he said. Even though our farmers are out here using the water, our water gets recharged really well every single year out here. So that's another, wow, Kankakee County. But anyway, so going into this a little bit more in terms of zones and stuff, You can also think about this berm and swale thing as a zone map for yourself. So the center where it's a swale, maybe that's also a fantastic place for your ground covers, because they're hardy growing plants. They're tough, they're gonna cover all the territory. You can stomp all over them when you're out there harvesting, just as much as you can use them for the slope stabilization. And this is also showing how you can do your annuals. Who likes to grow at your home veggies? Tomatoes, lettuces, cucumbers, melons. Anybody like to grow? Yeah. So you could grow that in a berm and a swale with some perennial trees and call it permaculture, call it good land management, whatever you want to call it, but make your larger food production go up and use microclimates to your advantage. So if some of these trees are going to cast a little shade somewhere, maybe that's a good thing, because guess what? Lettuce in the middle of June, July, it's going to taste pretty nasty unless there's a shade canopy, right? It's going to be bitter. So again, just strategically using your land. And I want to dive into this whole notion of carbon sequestration for a minute and how it relates locally. This is how everyday people can sequester carbon. Everybody's always freaking out saying, oh my God, we need to sequester the carbon, climate change. Climate change is totally real, right? Whether it's from just human processes exclusively or part of a natural cycle. In any event, it's happening, global warming is a thing. But this is what we can do to sequester carbon locally. We don't have to put highly pressurized CO2 through pipelines and channel it in such a way that's going to cause an incredible amount of illness and death of humans and wildlife if there ever is a leak in it. We don't have to do that to sequester carbon. That's not, that's a very hard way. That's a very difficult way to sequester carbon. There's a lot more that goes into that. A really simple way that has a lot less risk is simply burying our dead trees. That is literally the summary. You can bury dead trees and sequester carbon successfully. And this is how you can do it. Some people, again, this is just reappropriating native knowledge, but around soil building. They call this culture because of somebody that came up with it in the Swiss Alps when there wasn't a lot of soil around. So this is how you build soil. You're building soil, you're building organic material, you're building an incredible loam to grow in, and you're also sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere because these trees have already done that hard work for you. All you're doing in return is returning it to the earth itself, okay, in a bioavailable form. So you can bury your larger woody material with your smaller woody material like sticks on top, and then put a little of existing soil in there. And in a swale or a walkway where you're trying to step over it all the time, get some wood chips. You can get free wood chips. Did you know that? Wood chips are like a free asset in this area, just dangling out there in the wind, like, take me, free assets. And you can just turn that into carbon. You can turn that into something highly productive, and it's gonna soak like a sponge. So you see in the middle where it says water and time. When we get these increasingly consistent, intense rain events, and we're just getting like rain on rain on rain, and all the roads are flooded, and everybody's freaking out, like, it's raining, and it's like, yeah, it's raining in your garden. You're gonna be sitting there watching that wood soak it all up. All the wood chips are just gonna be like, thanks for feeding me, and then the next day it's gonna be like 90 degrees outside, and you'll be standing there like in a sauna, like, oh, it's so moist and humid here, but all my plants look better than ever. And that's because all the landscape just soaked up that water, stored it, slowed it, and sunk it. I don't know, I'm making up S's now, but you get the point. It kept the water in place, and it's making it stay there and build the soil. And this also allows for nutrient release. And also, you're building a fungal dominated soil in this process, which our woodlands tend to be fungal dominated soils, because that's fungal. Backing up a little bit, fungus and bacteria are like two necessary friends on a team, and they both need to be present at all times. But which person is leading for scoring a goal or whatever, a point, which entity, if it's fungus or bacteria, that's contingent upon the ecosystem. So in a woodland, you want fungus to be leading. They're like your star player in a woodland environment. They're gonna help that environment out. They're gonna make those plants pop, okay? Whereas in a veggie garden with all the tomatoes and the lettuces and the cucumbers, etc., that's a bacteria's player's game. So you want the bacteria in the soil to be a little higher than the fungus. So if you are talking about permaculture and even a mixed land use application of woodies and herbaceous material, it's a good thing to think about in terms of how do I develop a fungal dominated soil. And if you just give your landscape a little bit of worm castings where you're going to do your annuals, where you're going to make your tomatoes and your other vining creatures, whatever, that's going to establish a bacteria heavy soil in that area just fine, because worms are some of the best way to increase bacteria nutrients. This is another way you can sequester carbon or make good use of dead wood. Mushroom logging. Has anybody ever done this? Oh, so fun. Let me tell you, I've grown mushrooms a variety of ways. And there's so many difficult ways to grow mushrooms. You gotta sanitize your material, and then you gotta make sure no air touches it, and then you gotta inject your lid or whatever with a syringe, because if there's a drop of air, it's all gonna go to hell in a handbasket. But with nature, you can grow on logs, and this is by far the easiest way to make mushrooms happen, is to literally drill a hole in your logs, drill several holes in your logs, take your inoculated sawdust or whatever, and plug those holes. You can seal them with wax. You don't have to seal them with wax. And then, a month, 2 months, 3 months, depending on the season, the temperature, the water, all that jazz, you're gonna have a flush of mushrooms. And fun fact, if you are going into farming or food cultivation for the purposes of producing, cash, this is some of the highest market value crops that you can possibly produce is mushrooms. So I come back to, why is it that we're not sequestering carbon with mushroom logs and selling those as culinary contributions? Why are we shipping in mushrooms from the south end of the state? Because those people are the ones that have already figured out how to turn their timberlands into mushrooms and make a good piece of coin off of it. So again, when this is all done, this mycelium is eating this, it's breaking down. This is decomposition. It's taking that wood material and making it very bioavailable for whatever. So when it's all said and done, you can throw this log in a hugel mound, or you can just kick it and it'll fall apart. It's gonna be bioavailable and turn into soil. So what is this? And this is meant to be like, what? I don't know what this is, but really, what is this? Just take a guess. What am I trying to show you with this? Roots? Food forests, absolutely food forests, absolutely roots. What else? Yep, totally. It's an applied swale and burn. What'd you say? Did you say something else over here?
I was trying to say what she said,
okay.
but I didn't know the words.
Okay, cool. So it's a berm and a swale planted out. And it's also, does this look more dry or wet type plants? Just as a random guess, shooting in the dark. Wet? Okay, well actually, I like that. And it could be wet. A lot of these plants go both ways, which is really convenient when you're planting climate, in stable landscapes. But this is actually a dry plant palette selection. And again, all these plants are available at Possibility Place Nursery. And I've arranged them in such a way that would be practical in the landscape, given light requirements and water needs. And so this is like a drought-tolerant planting selection. This is like a guild, right, in permaculture lingo. You could take these plants and put them in a drier space and maybe nurture them a little more their first year. I know people in the permaculture world who don't. My first mentor, Anna Maria Leone, she was like, no, if it doesn't survive, I don't want it. She's like, that's not the kind of mom I am. I was like, dang it. But that's really how she approached it. So if you want to think about what type of landscapes are you cultivating? Do they need a lot of pampering in order to live, or can they really just kind of do it themselves once you set it up for success? This is the same information shown a little differently. I included the Latin name in case anybody thought that was useful, as well as the height on the far right of each of those lines. So you can see how, again, these are like the layers of the forest, and thinking about canopy, thinking about coverage. These are some of the things that you want to plan for when you're arranging plants. How will light interact in this space if I put a 50-foot American chestnut here, wherever that is, right? Okay, what is this? Should be easier now, right? What is this?
It's super wet.
Yeah, this is like the super wet guild. And what's funny is I put elderberry in the guild to make a point. Elderberry, if you don't know, is like a water-loving plant, but elderberry is also tough as nails, and it can survive in a dry environment and produce at the same time. So again, one of those plants that goes both ways with it. But here's the wet food forest guild, and I love black walnut. I grew up with a black walnut tree next to my house that my grandpa planted. It was beautiful every year. I couldn't get over how beautiful it was. It cast a lot of shade, but it's a nice little tree, you know. But it wasn't little, but it was a nice tree. Point being, look at what you can grow in here: chokeberries, wild gooseberries. Has anybody ever had a gooseberry? Yes. Okay. What did it taste like?
It was sour.
It was sour. Could you see how that gooseberry might be transformed really nicely into like a jam, you know? Okay, add a little something extra sweet with it, and it really would just balance out just fine. It's almost like a sour grape, right? And it's, again, native to this landscape. What about a currant? Has anybody had currants? Yeah, what'd you think of the currants?
Delicious.
Delicious, right? There's a lot of different types of currants, and people in like Europe have picked up on the currants more than we have, which is kind of, again, funny to me, because again, currants make a divine jam, spread on whatever you want your jam over, really quite good. Persimmon, has anybody had the persimmon? Yeah, persimmons? Okay, what are they like?
Kind of bitter-ish, but they're good.
They can be bitter. It's really important to wait till they're super ripe, which is, again, not super compatible with our industrialized food system, right? Because if you're shipping these really delicate little pockets of juice, they're like little juice bags. Persimmons, once they're ripe, it's like you can poke it the wrong way and it fall apart. But it's delicious, and that's when you want to eat it. And so when you're in the conventional grocery store, those aren't always going to like stay shelf stable very well. But in a food forest, if it's an immediate, a local food production source on your land or your local land, or you have a local venue or source to give that, sell it to, whatever, it makes a lot of sense because it's fresh. So I have a little scenario to show you, because a lot of this is like big picture conceptual. You can be like, yeah, that's great to see these plants arranged, but what about all the issues that come with it? And I love when we can solve landscape-based issues, so I'm going to show you how we can manage that in this example. So for example, there's this indigo bush, right? And this indigo bush loves light. It is a light drinking being. Indigo really likes the sun. And so say it existed in this garden guild for like 4 years. It was really happy, it was really thriving, it drew in all sorts of beneficial pollinators. Everybody was always visiting it through the summer or whatever, buzzing around. But then all of a sudden, you know, it's the 5th year and the surrounding trees, thankfully, they've finally grown, because it can take 3 to 5 years to get fruit off of a tree, and that's if you're lucky with a good soil profile. Sometimes it can take 7 years, and that can also be a species-dependent thing, like with pawpaws. You know, you're not going to get fruit off of an Asimina triloba for 7 years, very likely. So, in any event, it's finally year 5, you know, and your indigo bush is not, you know, it's not going to be doing so well, you're thinking, because it needs a lot of light and the trees have grown in, they're casting a lot more shade. What do you do? What do you do? Thinking about succession, there's at least 3 options that you can choose. Number 1, you can just replace that indigo bush with a more shade-tolerant plant, such as the gooseberries. Gooseberries are gonna, you know, they don't care about the shade, that's their happy place. If you put them in too much sun, they might dry out even. Another option would be to divide the indigo and plant a gooseberry right next to it, allowing the 2 plants to just kind of figure it out, battle royale style, for anybody's into the Hunger games like that. And then a third option would be leaving the indigo in and seeing what happens. You can always change it as needed, which is again a very laissez-faire way of food production. But here's the thing, if you get rid of that indigo, or even if you don't, indigo is this awesome nitrogen fixing plant. What does that mean when a plant is nitrogen fixing?
They take nitrogen out of the air and they convert it to a soil. They put it into the soil and convert it to a branch of other things.
Exactly, beautiful summary, Katrina. So like 70% of our atmosphere is nitrogen, but that's like not relevant to a plant until another plant that can take it in and convert it and put it into the soil does so. So the fun thing is about this, or funny, is that nobody tells you when they're like, yeah, plant your nitrogen fixers, everybody, nitrogen fixers, nitrogen fixers. Nobody tells you in order to activate that release of the nitrogen into the soil that the plant's done such a good job collecting for you, you need to cut it. You need to cut the plant. That is the nitrogen fixer. And that can be a little counterintuitive because you're like, I thought I wanted my plant to survive and thrive. Well, nature is, it's also destructive, and there's a reason for that sometimes, and this is a good reason to trim your nitrogen fixing plant. So if you do have an indigo, guess what? If you're letting it grow for 5 years, that's fine and dandy, but you're not releasing the nitrogen into the surrounding plant's world for them to soak up until you cut it. So you can cut it in a way to invigorate the plant, as seen at the top cut line, and say you want to keep it there, see what happens, or you can just cut it to remove it. And basically, the idea behind this is that plants usually keep kind of a balance between whatever is above ground and whatever is below ground. So if you take off mass from above ground, the roots below ground of equal and opposite matter are going to die off and release all that nice nitrogen into the soil real quick and be a nice available nutrient contributor there, as seen at the bottom with the little speckles. So funny thing, kind of zooming in on the ecology of this plant, just as like an interesting, example of how we can make ecologically informed decisions in our landscape management. You can see how not only is this plant a butterfly host plant, it's loved by birds, it releases nitrogen into the soil when you cut it, and it's pretty, okay? In addition to all that, in some places in the world, such as Europe, it's an invasive, which is hilarious. I mean, it's not hilarious for those people, but it's hilarious to us, because to hear it doesn't grow like that, not in that way, right? And so this is an article I found where they're saying a noxious invasive alien plant in Europe or a medicinal plant against metabolic disease. Because come to find out, this could be like the next cure to diabetes. And it's like, yeah, in the garden. Of course that's where you're gonna find it, right? But the idea is the right plant, the right place. And also plants have many different functions, and the perspective on a plant can change across place, across space. And this is like my favorite slide of the whole thing, I think, because I'm just such a nerd about walnuts, this series of slides right now. And anyway, so jug loan, right? This is all from that podcast I mentioned at the beginning, the Defense of Plants. And basically, there was this scientist on there recently talking about how black walnut allelopathy is kind of less intense or less of a big deal than we think it is. And has anybody heard that black walnuts are really bad to grow under? You've heard that, right? That black walnuts are they're terrible to grow under. It's gonna kill everything. It's one of the most repeated things in the world of trees and cultivation is that, black walnut is terrible for the landscape. And the reason is because those chemicals that it emits are called juglone, and it's like a weed suppressant is how you can think of it, in effect. It's not gonna, from my observation, the black walnut will kill grass. It will hinder, I should say, it'll hinder grass. It will hinder a lot of herbaceous material. It's not gonna be a big ally with germinating seeds, from what I've seen. So again, it can be really challenging if you're trying to get grass to establish there. But many native plants survive and thrive under it, okay, despite this. And why is that? Why do native plants survive and thrive amidst juglone emitting super killer of the woods, black walnut? Why do they survive?
They learn to take care of routine and simply that was around the
Yeah, and they've adapted through thousands of years, right, as to how to do that. So they have think of our lifetimes, it's just a fleck of dust compared to what this is out here, right? So this is thousands of years of biological evolution in the making, and all these plants have figured it out in that amount of time as to how to exist around the black walnut, because they're from the same land. They understand what the black walnut is emitting out there. And some people, including Edible Acres, who I showed you in the beginning, they say, with a lot of energy behind it, they're like, we can definitively prove after 10 years of data collection on our site that black walnut has a helpful impact on at least two plants, the pawpaw and the black raspberry. So they're saying that those two plants do even better around a black walnut. This plant that everybody wants to cast is the killer of the woods. This is, you know, how you can think about it in terms of reappropriating that and working with it rather than against it. Which again, if you remember, that's the guild. I put pawpaw in here, and I put other juggalo tolerant plants. These are all juggalo tolerant native plants. So anyway, there's a lot of functions out of walnut. It's a butterfly host plant for literally over 100 species. What? This plant is a host plant for over 100 different species? How many species are there that need a host plant, you know? But this is one that's gonna accommodate quite a few of those species. And it's loved by cavity nesting and songbirds. Who doesn't like a songbird? Not to mention, in a food forest context in the Midwest, kind of relevant because this is a protein source. It's plant-based protein, of course, a protein source nonetheless, and it's a source of omega-3 fatty acids. Why am I freaking out over that? Why are omega-3 fatty acids really important for us humans?
Your brain.
Yeah, your brain. It's like you can't necessarily prevent Alzheimer's, right? But data shows that that's one of the ways that you can functionally, more or less, hedge your bets and protect yourself as much as you can against Alzheimer's is by consuming omega-3s. And a lot of times omega-3s are only available in what types of foods? Fish, and a lot of times like more seafood type, like salmon and whatnot. And if we don't have salmon in the Kankakee, where's our omega-3? Okay, and it's on the walnut tree. Okay, that's where it is. That's where it is. Not to mention it's a lumber source. Okay, it's a fantastic lumber source. This is my grandpa's walnut tree that I had sawed because the neighbor cut it down, but thankfully she was cool enough to make sure I got it. So this is the lumber. It's actual walnut. It's beautiful, right? So again, how could this one tree, this is just one species out of like a million, right? That you can get so much out of. It's a food, an essential nutrient source. It's a habitat, place for over 100 species, a host plant at that, which means it's really quite beneficial, and it's a building material, so we don't have to wait 5 years for our stuff to ship from China. Okay, it's beautiful. So going back to this plant list, from Possibility Place, on the left you can see the categories that you already saw in the LiDAR data, and then in the light pink in the middle, that's where I indicated the number of species by habitat type that have a special call out on the Possibility Place website for being a pollinator hotspot or a host plant species. So these are plants, the number of plants that have a special ecological shout out associated with them, a special ecological function. That's the number in the middle in the light pink. And you can see bolded on the far right column, the top 3 finalists for habitat types that you can plant in Kankakee County to have a positive impact on our local endangered species and wildlife. And in order, they are shrubland. Remember I said shrubs are like the rock stars of landscaping for a variety of reasons. Shrubs, right? And right after that, ding, 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 the food forest, which again, there's overlap. So a lot of the shrubs go into the food forest, along with a lot of other edible plants. But the food forest typology, ecosystem, whatever theme, whatever you want to think of it as, that has incredible potential for positively impacting habitat for a variety of endangered species. So not only can we feed ourselves and make these beautiful constructed landscapes, but we can build habitat, which is the number 1 reason for ecological, just biodiversity decline across the entire world. That's the number 1 reason that we have lost so many species is habitat decline. So why not reestablish some of that and eat it too? And that's another, ooh, inception. No, there's a graphic and a graphic and a graphic. Okay, really, just forget about that. And with that said, unless somebody like you cares a whole awful lot and does something like plant a food forest, we're all in trouble. No, I'm just kidding, but for real, it's gonna mean a lot to the native habitat, to the native pollinators, the native wildlife. If you do your little contribution and make a little spot in whatever patch of land you can to allow them food and habitat, a place to stay and something to eat, because that's what you do for friends. So here, speaking of kind of my work and where I want to go with this, I want to develop local food forests. I want to have community food forests in Kankakee County. This is where I see my next 10 years of life going. I'm from here, I grew up here. This is really, quite near and dear to my heart if it's not completely evident. I love nature and what we have to offer in this county. I'm very excited to go on this field day with you, but I want to bring this to the kids in our community. I want to bring this to people here who care about food and nature and food access in an increasingly unpredictable world where we have shipping, distribution issues, interruptions, and unreliable food sources all around us. I really want to support our local stewardship capacity for not only beautification and food production, but endangered species habitat as well. So Earth Mama Ed is the nonprofit that I founded to do this work, and if you so feel inclined, you can donate at the QR link there, whatever, 5, 20, whatever makes sense for you, etc. People watching the recording, you can find out more at earthmamalandscaping.com, which is also where you can find my for-profit small business, which is a lot more developed currently than the nonprofit. The nonprofit's kind of like my last 15 years of life turned into an organization, and the for-profit is more like all of my applied stuff in recent history, where I've done different landscape transformations. So I do offer landscaping services, but I want to increasingly, build out my public engagement and skill transfer, because it's not useful when one person knows it, it's useful when 10, 20, 100 people knows it. So that's what I want to do. I want to share this knowledge with everybody who can, benefit from it and have a lot of fun in the process. So if you're interested in supporting it in any way, shape, or form, you can definitely get in touch with me. You can let me know if you want to volunteer, because that's also another form of equity. And with that said, thank you so much. I hope you go and plant something and enjoy the rest of your day. We're going to do the field portion soon here, but I'm going to give us an hour for lunch and a half an hour for travel from our departure time here. So if you want to find a local lunch space around town, we're in downtown Kankakee, there are many options for food. If you pack to lunch, there is a gazebo outside this building in the parking lot where the farmers market happens.